Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming today. This is truly unique in my Coast Guard career. 26 years I've been in. I was 10 years enlisted, and the rest have been as an officer. I started off in this organization pretty much painting ships and scrubbing toilets. So I have an appreciation of doing what we're doing today, which is both volunteerism and it's meaningful. I'm actually, it is an honor to see you here today. I can't imagine. We started off in 1999 with one person. It wasn't much of a network. It was like the Citizens Action person. But the cap had already been taken, so we couldn't name it cap. I'm a product of my family's from Southwest Louisiana. We're Cajun, and there's a belief down there that simple is always better. Anybody agree with that? Okay, say, hey, Cousin Hurley, we're having a party tonight. Let's go fishing. Let's catch some fish for everybody. So, oh no, man, put those poles away. Watch this. He throws dynamite in the water. Boom! We got fish to feed everybody. So, taking that theory. It came to me one night. I was working in the Mona Pass. Does anybody know where the Mona Pass is? One retired captain in the back of the room. Anybody else know it? The Mona Pass is what separates the Dominican Republic from Puerto Rico. And I was down there as a young junior officer, and I was assigned to law enforcement duties. We had an extreme amount of Dominicans wanted to get into Puerto Rico, and they wanted to go on and fly it into the United States and become citizens in a sort of way. And they were having both trouble getting across. There was a lot of lives lost in coming across. The Mona Pass is very treacherous, and they come across in these very low-slung vessels called yolas. And the yolas were very, very hard to detect with the ship's radar, both because of the material of the yola and the profile of the yola, which is very low. Needless to say, Border Patrol, Coast Guard, the local police got together and decided that they were going to stop these migrants. And so they went out there, Coast Guard, 378-foot cutters, 110-foot cutters, C-130s, the occasional jet, and then our assisting agencies. We're all out there looking for these vessels coming in, doing our best, but our success rate was rather low. They were still getting in by the hundreds. We'd find vessels, yolas, washed ashore the next day, 6, 8 at a time. All the migrants had disappeared into the Puerto Rican wilderness. So I show up there. I've been working in North Carolina on the Outer Banks, doing law enforcement and drug enforcement and search and rescue. And I show up there and I start working in this command center. And every day I'm getting reports of the ships out, the planes out, and assisting agencies working with us. All these layers and very, very expensive, and there's so much time and energy being spent. But we get the occasional migrant per a number of hours we work, and the ratio is really kind of crazy to me. Again, I'm kind of simple-minded. So as a JG, I raised my hand one day at a command ops brief, and I said, "Excuse me, Commander, I know I'm kind of new here, but have you ever tested the system? Essentially, have you ever had a red team try to make it in under a controlled environment?" "What are you suggesting there, Lieutenant?" I said, "Well, I'd like to command a yola, and perhaps you can give me a small crew, and that my team and I will try and come on into the Puerto Rican coast undetected, and we can communicate, and you can try and get us." Well, that's interesting, and a few days later, I had my yola, my first command. A couple petty officers and an ensign. I had my own ensign. And our job, both day and night, was to do these operations. And we got into it. Man, we put on some more clothes and hats, and we went on out into the open ocean, out into the Mona Pass. And at one point I called my wife, and the phone line wasn't working so well. And I told her I was going out in a yola into the Mona Pass. And she's like, "What?" I said, "No, I'm going out into the Mona Pass on a yola." And it was very hard to describe to her, but she thought I was seeing a girl named Mona. Anyway, I had to explain to her it wasn't the case. I thought I'd fix some situation. Anyway, so we went out, and it was daytime operations, and we're coming on in. They dropped us off way out at sea, and I had a couple different radios. I could monitor the chatter between the aircraft and the ships. And then I can monitor the chatter between the ships to the smaller ships. And I can see them out there on the horizon. And we had a blue tarp over the Yola, and it matched the ocean, and we're coming in real slow. And I got to tell you, folks, without giving away any state secrets, it wasn't that hard to avoid those big, giant white ships. You could see them from a long way away. And if they started to come one way, we went the other way. They started going the other way, we went the other way. And we made it in. Well, you know, that didn't sit very well with the ship's captains who had me on board for dinner. They pulled us back from the ocean and we came aboard. It was kind of interesting going up to this wardroom with this, you know, the senior captain and dressed as, you know, almost like a Somali pirate. But, so we told them what we had found, what we had seen. We documented some of the activities. And then we shoved off into a nighttime operation. But this time they had a secret plan. They were going to bring in Customs and Border Protection, and they were going to have extra assets out there, and they were going to get us. Well, kind of the same thing happened. We pulled up our tarp, and we kept our heat profile up because they did have FLIR, forward-looking infrared radar, but they only had like a 4 to 6% opportunity to see. So it's like they describe it as trying to find a heat source through a straw. So as they fly around, it's somewhat limited. And they had an AP-64 radar. Of course, they're having a hard time getting us. To make a long story, not so long, we were able to get ashore during the nighttime. It was even easier because those ships turned on what were called lights. And they're out there, and it looked like Christmas trees. And we just avoided the Christmas trees and came on in. But it occurred to me as we were hitting the beaches that on this beach, the last line of defense, were these $1 million homes. Up and down the beaches, on the cliffs, near the forest, by the river. And as we came ashore, I got to thinking again, it's a dynamite fishing principle. Why haven't they alerted these people who live here about the opportunity to help solve this problem? Simple, perhaps. Can a resident who lived on that beach 5, 6, 8, 10 years help? Maybe. Fast forward a couple of years, I take over as the Group Operations Officer for Seattle. And my AOR back then extended all the way up here to the Canadian border. I had Station Bellingham, Station Seattle, and all the way down the South Puget Sound. This is about the time, if you recall, 10 years ago, it was called a tech boom. High tech, people had stocks and they were going through the roof. If you had that little fruit company called Apple, they're doing rather well. And so a lot of people were buying vessels, boats, and they'd shove off. They didn't know what they were doing. Dozens of new boats on the water. People on radios decided, oh, what's this term Mayday all about? I don't know, Mayday. And the Coast Guard would answer up, vessel calling Mayday, what is the nature situation? Oh my gosh, that's the Coast Guard, I better not say anything. Well, guess what? They just started a search. They started a search. And we might get lucky and get a line of bearing on that vessel or not. But per doctrine for the Coast Guard, we are responsible then to conduct a search, to rule in or rule out the possibility of an actual Mayday. And about that time, out comes a movie called The Perfect Storm, if you recall. Yeah. And that movie was full of the term Mayday. And I think that every boater out there all of a sudden want to try out their new radio and try that term Mayday. My gosh, I had what was called back then, it was kind of new, a cell phone. And that darn thing about ruined me. Because sure enough, and you can help me here if this trend still continues, during the summer, it's 2 a.m., guess what boaters like to do who've been drinking? They like to do two things. They like to A, shoot off expired flares, and then B, maybe watch what happens. You know, and not fun for the operators. So what I was doing on any given night, honest to goodness, is I had 2 stations, I had 2 boat crews, and the occasional aircraft I'd borrow from these guys over here. And they weren't my aircraft, I had to beg and borrow for them. But by doctrine, I had to search. So I'm up all night searching for a target that wasn't really in trouble. And my crews are getting tired. They're getting, they're in dangerous situations, but I've got layers of cases. I've got an overdue over here. I've got the report of a migrant over there. I've got a SAR case, a Mayday which came with some laughter, okay, and a flare case. Flare cases are terrible because 98% of those flare cases are false alarms. And to stand down from a required primary search and a secondary search, which is the first light search, and for the Coast Guard, first light searches mean you're on scene on the water a half hour before sunup. So in the summer, what time is that? Pretty early. To get on scene at 4 a.m., 4:30 a.m., you're leaving Station Bellingham at 3, having finished your search, the first search, about midnight or 2:30. You're not getting much sleep. Very dangerous situation.